The knock was like a war cry, three loud raps that cut through the stillness of morning just as I was drizzling honey on my cornbread. Two men dressed in uniforms that seemed to scream, "Budget security," stood on my porch, their stance rigid like they were charging onto the battlefield. The taller of the two, who wore a badge that seemed to have been ripped from a cereal box, patted the place on his belt where a gun would traditionally be. There was only a large holster and a flashlight too large for either. "Ma'am," he said, puffing out his chest, "you're in violation of HOA Code 17.4. You need to be out by sunset." I blinked. Then I looked over at my hound, Rusty, who low and deep growled, like thunder rumbling far away. I never joined any HOA. This property, it was mine, passed down from my grandfather, who'd claimed it long before any HOA had been formed. And now these so-called cops were trying to boot me off my own land? I pushed my plate aside, dried my hands, and said, "Coffee before I call the sheriff, or after?" It wouldn't have been the first time someone had underestimated me, but this may have been the most brazen attempt so far. My cabin sits at the end of Willow Creek, where barbed wire and ancient oaks mark the boundary between honest freedom and the suburban sprawl closing in a little more every day. For months, rumors had circulated about an HOA from the new complex down the street, buying up property with paper-thin title deeds and implicit threats. I'd thought my deed, recorded in county records since 1918, would protect me from that debacle. Apparently not. These two, presenting themselves as Officer Vance and Officer Mitch, evaded every straightforward question. Which HOA? They spoke Willow Estates in hushed tones as if reciting Holy Writ. "Got a court order?" I inquired. "No need," they replied. "HOA protocol." "Badge numbers?" They recited three each, probably fabricated on the spot. They asserted the HOA had taken in my property, that it became common ground. Asserted my cabin, my place of birth, was a non-compliant dwelling. I invited them to produce the deed. They shrugged and explained anything older than 30 years was open to contention. I glared them down and instructed them to leave my porch, or the sprinklers would come on. Not the kind that merely spray water either. They retreated, but a tow truck down the road, parked like a vulture awaiting a meal, informed me they'd be back. I placed three calls. The county clerk confirmed no zoning changes. The sheriff's department made it plain. On my property, no HOA could evict without a court order. And impersonating a cop? That was a felony. My cousin Nate, who has a drone photography business, volunteered to lend a hand. I wasn't going to let this pass. As I sat on my porch, the golf cart cavalry rolled in. Taking the lead was HOA Queen Diane Palmer, sporting worn leather and shades that literally consumed her face. She clutched a clipboard as if it were a royal scepter and growled commands regarding some sort of Phase 5 annexation. Her minions spread out over my property. One of them rolled a measuring wheel along the fence line as if he were Lewis and Clark claiming territory. I shot the entire circus. Diane stormed up to my steps, shouting that my cabin was a code infraction and that she had complete enforcement authority. I asked her to read the Constitution before spouting her little HOA mantra. She thrust a piece of paper into my hand, a so-called newsletter with a childlike crayon-drawn map. My land was red-lined, marked Community Expansion Zone. No legal seal, no court stamp, just arrogance. She went on and on about mutual benefit, and all I could envision was her calling 911 on children selling lemonade. I asked her if she had any idea what a pre-existing deed was. She replied as if it didn't matter, said everything was up for revision. I gave her 5 minutes to vacate, or she'd be facing a court summons. Her face didn't pale, it reddened. Not with shame, but rage. She turned on her heel, heels clicking like shots, her crew scattering like roaches at a bug zapper. I couldn't sleep that night. This wasn't HOA overreach. It was a calculated land grab, a scam masquerading in fake uniforms and forged maps. I unearthed my trusty old leather briefcase from the back of the bed. Still had the scent of wee hour legal wars. I hadn't handled it in years. But Diane desired war. I'd sue her straight away. The following morning, her golf cart returned, parked as close to my line as you could get. Diane was sitting there with a self-satisfied expression, clutching another set of papers. This time she came with two thugs taking pictures of my fence like it was a crime scene. She said my property had officially been absorbed into Phase 5, thanks to a unanimous board vote. She waved me off and gave me a laminated map that resembled more of a child's art project. No survey lines, no coordinates. My cabin was marked Shared Utility Structure. I asked her if she even knew what that was. Our lawyer, Greg, she replied, no last name. One of her goons attempted to staple a violation notice on my fence. I ripped it down without hesitation. I threatened the man. Try staking another notice, and he'd be buying a whole new fence. He backed away, grumbling something about just following orders. Diane wasn't finished. She ordered more measurements, saying they were rethinking property taxes. That's when the whole picture clicked into place. This wasn't all about intimidation. They were attempting to make money off my property. Suddenly, Tom, the neighbor who owns the dairy farm on the other side of the road, pulled up in his truck. He told me that Diane had designated his fields as a future community park in her most recent newsletter. That self-styled document, it had some elaborate Vision 2026 scheme with a digitally doctored picture featuring my land redrawn as a lakefront clubhouse. I headed straight to the county records office, dug out my grandfather's original land grant, untouched for 7 decades. No new zoning, no ownership transfers. I opened a folder and labeled it HOA scam. At the diner, I pushed Diane's map over the table to the sheriff. He snorted when he noticed the badge logo, referred to it as clip art nonsense, and said he'd speak to the county attorney regarding filing a restraining order. Later that evening, Nate's drone caught 2 individuals creeping up to my gate. They were installing fake HOA signs and spray painting directional arrows. We obtained direct shots, both of their faces, their vehicle, even the license plate number. Everything went into the evidence folder. Their follow-up was a community outreach booth outside my 10-foot front gate. Loudspeaker, fold-down table, HOA banner, the whole shebang. Diane posed there like a fair queen, holding the mic, speaking about some members-only lakefront proposal and referring to my cabin as a temporary building. I emerged, megaphone in hand, and read my deed aloud as Nate flew the drone above. Diane attempted to drown me out, but a couple from the crowd called her out. Why had dues tripled? Why weren't there open meetings? Others joined in. Questions flew. Someone brought up the fake cops. Someone else mentioned the suspicious signs. Diane's smile wavered. She gave evasive answers. Something about members-only access and board discretion. But the tide had turned. A woman near the back said, clear as day, I never agreed to steal someone's land. I sipped my coffee as Diane's little empire began to crumble. The next day, a flyer landed in my mailbox. No return name, just one line. You're not alone. She's draining funds. Meet me behind the dog park after dark. I left Rusty at home and parked a few blocks away. A guy in a windbreaker was throwing a ball for his dog. He was on the HOA board, had been intimidated into silence. He showed me screenshots, Diane's private messages, talks about selling out my land to developers, paying for it all with HOA dues through her sister's so-called security company. I gave him a burner email. That evening, he sent me a data dump, Diane's entire plan, a year-long plan to steal my property by means of counterfeit notices, false infractions, intimidation, and calculated neglect. I opened my briefcase, began compiling the legal package. Cease and desist letters, restraining orders, an injunction alleging impersonation, harassment, and fraud. By morning, my file was 2 inches thick, airtight and battle-ready. I delivered copies personally to the sheriff, the zoning office, and the courthouse. The sheriff verified it. The badge Diane's counterfeit officers sported, totally phony. Zoning officials discovered no mention of any Phase 5 growth. And the court clerk? She stamped my injunction documents without flinching. Diane naturally struck back. She erected a fresh sign on my boundary line, future site of HOA community pool. I ripped it out on the spot. In the nearby brush, I watched her goons scurrying off, walkie-talkies held in hand. That afternoon, I sent a letter to each of the neighborhood's homeowners. Each a revelation about Diane's deceit, her phony cops, her doctored maps, and the misuse of their dues. At the next HOA board meeting, I strolled on in, placed a restraining order and a flash drive on the table. Evidence, drone footage, emails, doctor documents, payment records. I looked Diane in the eye and said, "You're going to need a lawyer." The sheriff called not long after. Thousands of comments from across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. Diane disappeared. Her home remained dark. Homeowners were outraged, seeking refunds, disclosure, and her resignation immediately. One lawn sported a new sign, "Not my HOA president." The court hearing loomed. I dressed in jeans, a blazer, and boots that had seen actual fights. Neighbors nodded outside the courthouse. Reporters took notes. They weren't observing. They were cheering for something right. Diane arrived with her attorney, her nephew, allegedly a child in a bargain suit, already sweating through his shirt. She was in a pastel pantsuit, jaw set like she could bite through steel. The judge wasted no time. He ended their argument over community growth with one question: "Where is your evidence of annexation?" They had none. I put it all out there. My deed, Nate's drone video, bogus maps, emails tracing HOA money flowing into Diane's sister's business. The judge inquired of Diane's team, "Do you contest this land deed?" "No." "Do you have any jurisdiction over this property?" "No." "Why did you send impersonators wearing uniforms that represent law enforcement?" Silence. He granted the injunction, ordered all HOA signs taken down, prohibited them from ever stepping foot on my land again, and referred the case to the district attorney. Diane gripped the table as if she could somehow maintain control. Outside, there were flashing cameras. I was hounded by reporters. I delivered one line: "Land theft doesn't need a bulldozer, just a lie and a clipboard." That evening, one of the board members sent me a recording. Diane accusing everyone else of being at fault. But it was turning around. Her own supporters turned, demanding her resignation. The sheriff made it official. Charges were imminent: impersonation, fraud, land theft. I hosted a barbecue. Ribs, cornbread, cold drinks. Neighbors who'd stood with me arrived with open arms. We celebrated the land that remains. Diane's trial was imminent, but I'd already prevailed. I converted the old HOA clubhouse, opened up Creekline Legal Hub, a venue to assist others to fight back against power-grabbing boards. A new sign stood at my gate: "Private property, no HOA." Right below it, "Defended by law and legacy." Rusty chased a squirrel around the yard. I smiled, sun on my face. Diane believed fear would triumph. She overlooked something easy: truth does not move.